Good evening. It's so nice to see everybody here. Welcome to AIE, the Academy for Innovative Education. We were established in July of 2011 in the former Glenn Curtis Elementary School. Glenn Curtis, of course, as you know, a great aviator. It is my pleasure to welcome Miami Springs Historical Society and Museum. And before Mr. Jamie Petrolanda comes to the podium to introduce our honored guest, I would like to introduce our leadership team at AIE, beginning with Dr. Walter Fahed, who is the middle high school principal, Ms. Ricardo, our elementary principal, Ms. Ganello, assistant principal, Mr. Kanji, program specialist, and Ms. Juriel, assistant principal. And now it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Jamie Petrolanda.
Thank you, Mrs. Hirsch. ¿Dónde está mi estudiante? Acuérdense que tienen que hacer la tarea hoy. A lot of my students showed up. I invited them, and they showed up. Okay. I'm sorry? All right. Everybody doing okay? All right. First, I would like to thank Dr. Fahed, Mrs. Hirsch, the students, especially one student at this school. Her name is Sofia Garcia. She's not here. Okay. Thanks to her, that flyer that we've been tweeting and retweeting and emailing and texting, she designed that flyer. So I think she did a fine job, and I wanted to give her a shout out. I want to thank the teachers and the school staff for your hospitality here tonight. This is beautiful. I mean, look around. This is beautiful. You folks did a fine job. I'm privileged and honored to welcome you folks tonight to help us make history. We're making history. I'm a school teacher by trade. I teach social studies. I teach American history and world history. And these students here, most of them are from my 8th grade class, world history. They're all Eastern, okay? One of the reasons why I spoke Spanish. On behalf of the Miami Springs Historical Society members, we'd like to thank you all for attending tonight's lecture with Dr. Montoya. We invite you all to our museum for a quick tour, refreshments, and pastelitos. Our museum is located right across the street. We're going to have police officers out there to help you cross the street. So hopefully everyone after the lecture goes across, you're going to enjoy yourselves at our museum. Okay. The Miami Springs Historical Society Museum has been a vital community resource for over 30 years. The organization was created to support and preservation of our history, home of Glenn Curtis, a city developer and an aviator. A robust collection of artifacts and educational mission is on display at the museum. So hopefully you folks can go visit. The museum's original location was at the historic Loan Building. Its second home was at the storefront at Westwood Drive. But now, with the support of the city, especially the current council and previous council, our city manager, William Alonso, and Ron Gorland is really the one who found the building for us. So I want to thank the city. Without the city, we wouldn't really have a building, we wouldn't really exist. So kudos to the city. Folks, lots more is coming, okay? With your support, stay tuned. For example, more history discussions like this one. We plan more discussions like this. Good turnout. I think everybody likes to hear about history. Okay. More public access to the museum. Our hours of operation now are Saturday 1 to 4, but we plan to extend the hours and the hours of operations and the days. Right now we're only open on Saturdays, but we plan to open Tuesday through Saturday. It's our goal. Okay. Our museum is operated by a group of dedicated volunteers. I have to tell you, I'm the youngest one, so that tells you. But they're here and they're protecting our history, our city history. Now, enough of talking. Let's get to why we're here. Let me talk to you about our guest speaker. Dr. Rolando Montoya was called out of retirement to serve as president of Miami-Dade College from August 2019 to December 2020. He retired as provost for operations at Miami-Dade College in 2017, where he had served for 30 years in various ascending capacities as Miami-Dade College and number 39's former chief operation officer. He had jurisdiction over finance, information technology, institutional effectiveness, human resources facilities, legal affairs, resources development, and energy preparedness. I apologize. I should acknowledge some of the dignitaries that are here. Sorry. So we have our county commissioner, Alex Rizzo. Can we give him a hand, please? Our mayor, Maria Mitchell. Pedro Vasquez, council member. And Dr. Fahed, or Councilman Fahed. Sorry about that, folks.
You have a candidate too.
I'm sorry?
You have a candidate too.
Thank you. And I have it here. And we have a candidate for District 6 for school board, County Commissioner for District 6. He's one of the candidates that he wants to replace Commissioner Social. Okay. We invited Forrest too, but I don't think he's here. Okay. All right, let's continue. And I apologize. Dr. Montoya has been appointed and served honorably in federal, state, county, and local boards during his career. He's received a doctor, higher education, administration, and a master's in finance from Florida International University, a BBA from the Technological Institute of Monterrey, Mexico, and a degree in business from the University of Costa Rica. Dr. Montoya, number 39, prior position at Miami-Dade, included Wilson Campus, President, Dean of Academic Affairs, Kendall Campus, Chairperson of Business, Kendall Campus, and Professor of Accounting, Finance, Economics, and Statistics at the North Campus. Professor, I took all these classes for you, didn't I? And I I didn't take it because he was easy. I took it because he was hard. I mean, but he was very patient, fair, and did I say patient? Because he was. That's one of the, he's the reason I was able to complete my education. Thank you. Before joining the college in 1987, he worked in the private sector in the field of accounting and finance and served as consul of Costa Rica in Miami. He and his wife, Mariví, a retired administrator with Miami-Dade County Public Schools, are the proud parents and grandparents of 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. Okay, without any further delays, here's my professor, Dr. Montoya.
Everybody can hear me? Well, first of all, I want to thank Jaime Petralanda, president of the Miami Springs Historical Society and Museum, for inviting me to make this presentation. I also want to thank the Academy for Innovative Education, my friend Vera Hirsch, head of school, her principals, the staff for providing this convenient venue just across the museum. My gratefulness also goes to the Pedro Pans present here today, the many friends that I see in the audience, and everybody who came to listen about a fascinating subject of the Cuban history. I want to clarify that I'm not a Pedro Pan myself, but I left Cuba during the same period when I was 6 years old, and I will refer to that later on my lecture. Some of the information that I'm presenting was obtained from available records, but a lot of the information comes from my conversations with many Pedro Pan exiles and my observations during the years I lived in Panama, Costa Rica, and Mexico. Most of the lectures, discussion panels, and videos that have been presented refer to the causes and operations of the Exodus. Another subject frequently discussed are the experiences and emotions of those who had to leave the country without their parents. I will give you some basic information about the causes and the operations of the Pedro Pan Exodus to provide a framework, but the emphasis of my presentation will be on the shorter and longer-term consequences of the departure from Cuba of 14,000 unaccompanied children. Next slide, please. Here you have some of the basis of the operation, especially for all the young people who are here that probably never heard about this. But after the Cuban Revolution, when it was becoming very clear that it was a communist revolution, more than 14,000 children came to the United States without their parents, and they were from the ages of 6 to 18 years old. And this exodus took place from December of 1960 to October of 1962. The sponsors of this exodus were the Catholic Church, the American government, private citizens in Cuba, and in the United States. There was also some participation from Jewish organizations and Protestant organizations, since there were some Jewish young people who came and some Protestant people who also came. About half of the children were placed at the homes of relatives or parents or friends that they had here in Miami or in other parts of the United States, but the other half ended in special camps, in orphanages, and Catholic boarding schools, and foster homes. Something really good in the middle of all that suffering is that about 90% of the children were able to reunite with their parents during the 1960s. Next. Now, why this exodus? Well, there are a variety of factors that motivated parents to make this tremendous sacrifice of sending their children alone to another country. But among those factors, we can mention the closing of private schools by the communist regime. I still remember when the one I attended was intervened. Also, the regime expelled at that time about 300 priests, brothers and nuns from Cuba. Many of them were dedicated actually to education, and it was a very bad symptom, because if you can go and attack the Catholic Church so directly and so strongly, then what will happen to other institutions and to families and other individuals? Also, Castro, who initially was not very clear about his ideology, finally declared himself a Marxist-Leninist, and he also said that he had been such since the very beginning. Middle class, upper classes, professional class parents did not want their children going to public schools, especially after they were intervened. Now, there was also a rural literacy campaign. Actually, what you have, the picture that you have on the background is some sort of demonstration or parade of young people who decided to participate in that literacy campaign. Young people were being sent to the countryside to teach, but next one. But it was obvious that there were connotations of indoctrination, and also there were connotations of the government wanting to control the Cuban youth through this type of activities. The books that were being used, the educational materials that were going to be used for this were very indoctrinating. There was also rumor in Cuba, among many people, among the families, that the government was going to end the parental rights and that was going to send the children to indoctrination centers. Now, you have to believe those rumors, especially with all the changes that were being observed in Cuba. And the fact this is not new. Even the Spartan society, you know, before the Roman Empire, would take children when they were 6 years old, and the state would take care of them. People were also talking about 3,000 Spaniard children that the Republicans sent to the Soviet Union during the Civil War in Spain. Now, a factor that might have softened parents and helped them, I would say, adapt or tolerate the sacrifice that they were making, the decision that they were making, was that it was customary in Cuba for the upper classes to send children to the United States during the summer to camps, to educational institutions to learn English. And then you can rationalize, oh, this is going to be short term. This in some ways not so different from what we traditionally do of sending the children for 2 or 3 months to a place in the United States, and they come back. There was this conception that this was going to be short term. Now, there was this expectation that things would change in Cuba. Unfortunately, things never changed, and actually 62, 63 years later, they are even worse than what they were. Next slide, okay. Some initial consequences of the Pedro Pan exodus, okay. Some parents were not willing to send their children alone, and they went to exile together with their children. Therefore, in addition to the 14,000 children, there were many families that were also departing the island with their children, precisely for all the causes that we discussed. In some cases, the mother left with the children while the father remained in Cuba. That's my case. My mother left, I even remember the day, November 2nd, 1961. We left to Panama via Mexico, Merida, Mexico. And it was my sister and myself. I was 6, my sister was 3, and we went out with my mother. My father remained in Cuba. He didn't get permission to exit at that time. That's the case of my wife, who on February of '62 arrived in Miami. She was 10 months old. Her mother came with 4 children. The oldest was 8, and the youngest was 10 months. As the revolution looked more and more irreversible, the parents of the Pedro Pan children started to depart. They have double motivation. They saw what was happening in Cuba and how difficult the situation was becoming with the communist regime, but they were also missing their children, and they wanted to reunite with them. And this produced a massive chain emigration to exile. They were not only the Pedro Pans, and they were not only their parents, but you know, the uncles and the aunts and the grandparents and all their families and so on and so forth. It was a big chain of emigration. Now, the Pedro Pan children learned English and acculturated to the United States. Then when the parents and other relatives were arriving, they serve as cultural guides, and they serve as translators in many instances, because some of the relatives didn't speak any English. Now, some other consequences. The consolidation of the Marxist revolution. And I say this through the pressure cooker release effect. If you don't know what is that, and by the way, we are living it right now, with 180,000 Cuban refugees who have been crossing the border during this fiscal period, including 700 unaccompanied children who are also coming. But every time that the regime feels a strong opposition, demonstrations, criticism, agitation, and they believe that could cause damage to the stability of their power, they release people out to exile. And some examples that I have here: Camarioca on October of 1965, when they said, whoever has a relative who wants to pick you up on the Camarioca port can do it. My goodness, thousands and thousands of people did it to the point that it had to be stopped. But then they created the freedom flights that lasted from December 1965 to December of 1969. And that's how hundreds of thousands of Cubans came to Miami. You might remember the Mariel boat lift from April of 1980 to October of 1980. About 140,000 people were let go to alleviate the pressure. And then remember the rafters crisis of April of 1994, when they had to open the base of Guantanamo for refugees, etc. And as you know, we are on another of those examples of releasing the pressure with the recent immigration that we are observing. Another important consequence is that the productivity in Cuba declines enormously, and the economic crisis accelerates, and it's still in crisis, and it has been in crisis for those 62 years because of the immigration of talent. And so that you have an idea, the majority of the occupations, and I'm talking now not about the youngsters, but I'm talking about their parents and other relatives. They were business owners, they were business executives, they were engineers, they were accountants, they were physicians, they were university professors, they were K-12 teachers. And when a nation loses all that talent, all that brain power, you can only observe economic deterioration. By the way, the same thing has been happening in Nicaragua, and the same thing has been happening in Venezuela and in some other countries. Now, this is an interesting consequence. The American government was the leader of the West, of Western civilization in the Cold War, while the Soviet Union was the leader for the communist and the satellites. And the American government used this exodus that was being observed as part of the information, the propaganda that they were distributing. What better example of the disaster of a government, the persecution, the tyranny, than parents being willing to send their children alone in such large numbers. Now, some longer-term consequences of the Pedro Pan exodus.
It's not doing it. Technology.
Very good. By the way, on the background you have the pictures of some of the very successful Pedro Pans, although they are not the only ones, and it's impossible in this presentation to mention all of them. But longer-term consequence, Miami becomes a large Latinized city that attracts Spanish-speaking immigrants from all parts of Latin America, from the 21 Latin republics. The Pedro Pan children grow, get educated in American universities, providing important economic, political, religious, and cultural contributions to their adopted country. I have here some examples, and the Pedro Pans in the audience, you probably know about all these people and the successes that they have had. Francisco Angones, a prestigious lawyer from Miami, who has been president of the Florida Bar, and then the famous Tony Arguez, who was the principal of Morrison Brown and his Farra, that was one of the largest independent CPA firms in the United States. Octavio Cisneros, who was auxiliary bishop of Brooklyn and Queens. Alejandra Cosillo del Pino, actress and producer. Carlos Eire, university professor and author. Felipe de Jesus Esteves, the bishop of San Agustin, who was before auxiliary bishop of Miami. Mel Martinez, who was U.S. senator. Carlos Mayans, who was the mayor of Wichita. Maria de la Milera, who was assistant to Senators Dick Stone and Paula Hawkins, and later worked for Miami-Dade County. Eduardo Padrón, who was my boss for so many years, president of Miami-Dade College. Tomás Regalado, who was president of Miami-Dade. Carmen Valdivia, who is with us today, a great architect and also a former executive director of the Cuban Museum of the Diaspora here in Miami. Guillermo Vidal, who was mayor of Denver, and I could mention many more. Melvin Noriega, who had this successful Cuban souvenir store and then later became a producer of Cuban music. He's my friend, that's what I mentioned. By the way, his wife is also a Pedro Pan. Next. Okay. This is a very interesting consequence. The Pedro Pans now graduated from colleges and universities in the United States, and they were perfectly bilingual and bicultural. And at that time, in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, not many people in Latin America spoke English. And large American corporations, multinationals, found very appropriate and probably lucrative for them to hire these graduates from American universities to be sent to manage the affiliates, the subsidiaries, the branches of large American companies. The ones that I listed here, that by the way is not an exhaustive list. It's just some example because when I live in Panama, Costa Rica, and Mexico, that's when I met executives, Cuban executives who were Pedro Pans and were in charge of many of these corporations. For example, Arthur Andersen in Costa Rica, Juan Cotera was the president, and Mario Criado was in Dow Chemical in El Salvador. One of Mariví's cousins, Abelardo Bru, was the president of PepsiCo and Frito-Lay for Mexico. McAnedison had Mirta de la Cuesta, McAnedison, the large American advertising company, and so on. So Mike Santillanes was in Price Waterhouse. A cousin of mine was in Union Carbide, and I learned in a family party last week that one of my cousins, who is a Pedro Pan, Jorge de Sayas, was sent to Trinidad and Tobago to head a factory, Sylvania factory that they had over there. Therefore, it's incredible this presence of ranking executives for American corporations in Latin America. Now, the next one, yes. This presence of Cuban American executives, their families, and other Cuban exiles in Latin America contributed to a variety of things. First of all, it made it easier for large American companies to operate in Latin America with these executives that were adapted to the customs in the United States, who have studied here, who were perfectly bilingual and bicultural. And of course, this increased foreign investment in Latin America. The industrialization of Latin America in the 60s, 70s, Latin America was very rural, very agricultural, and industrialization came later, basically because of the presence of all these American companies in these countries. And this is an interesting one, since I have a background in accounting. Accounting was a mess in most of the Latin countries, but these young American-trained accountants, vice presidents of finance, controllers, were instrumental in the introduction and consolidation of the generally accepted accounting principles in Latin American countries. American corporations, the headquarters in the United States, would demand the accounting of their affiliates and subsidiaries to be done according to this principle. And then it spreads into education at the universities over there, and they created the Colegio de Contadores Públicos, like they existed in Cuba and they exist in the United States. And this is a good one. The presence of these Cubans in the Latin countries was an antidote to the spread of communism in Latin America. In the United States, there was a more clear conception, maybe because of the Cold War, or maybe because the history of the country, and you know that there were periods in the United States in which there was a strong persecution against communism. And there was also the experience of what happened after the Second War, in which the Soviet Union got half of Europe for this country not doing what, in my opinion, should have been done. But anyway, that's the fact. Then there was more consciousness in the United States about the evils of communism. In Latin America, of course, there were people who were clear about that, but there were masses of people who were not rejecting communism too directly or too strongly, and in many instances they have a positive opinion about the Cuban Revolution and a positive opinion about Fidel Castro, and in part was due to some of the anti-Americanism or anti-imperialism or whatever you want to call it that exists in many of those countries. I think that the Cubans who were witnessing what happened and what happened to them when they were children and they have to live and the sacrifice that they have to make and their parents made, and a description of all the atrocities that were taking place in Cuba was very helpful as a detente of communism in Latin America. Unfortunately, the situation now is different. Now it's spreading pretty fast. You have it in Mexico, you have it in Nicaragua, you have it in Venezuela, you have it with the new president in Colombia, you have it in Chile. It's sad to observe what is happening right now in Latin America. And to finish, and before we open to questions or comments, when reading the literature available on Pedro Pan right now, I noticed that at this time the Pedro Pans are concentrated in a couple of important tasks. One is preserving the history of the Exodus, and the other one is supporting the unaccompanied children immigrating to the United States. And before I open to questions, I would like my friend Melvin, if you could comment on two recent consequences, or two consequences that you described to me that I didn't know about it. One is the role that some Pedro Pans had in taking out of Cuba some of the political prisoners. And the other one is what you told me about a Pedro Pan scientist that is a contractor of NASA these days.
Okay, I want to mention the name of Maria de la Milera. To me, she did something great for my family and for so many Cubans that were political prisoners. Political prisoners were released after completing long sentences, and immediately they were trying to get them back in jails, so that there was a short period of time between them being released and them being incarcerated again. So we learned about this lady, Maria de la Milera, who was secretary to Paula Hawkins.
Senator Paula Hawkins.
Senator Paula Hawkins. And I myself was asked to make a letter, translate a letter, for several members of my hometown and my family. And which I did, and it was signed by the claimants that were family to the political prisoners. And it was sent to Maria de la Milera, and Maria, through Paula Hawkins and her contacts in Washington, immediately obtained releases for those prisoners in the way of being accepted as not immigrants, political exiles into the United States. So you know, that's something that you have. My own father, my godfather, was one of them, and I appreciated that very much. And I have mentioned it to my brothers and sisters, Pedro Pan, and I will gladly mention it many more times, because you have to be thankful.
And then the scientists that you...
The scientists happened the other day. We were having a lunch, great lunch, by the way, and this gentleman he was a Pedro Pan. You know, we overheard him talking that he works for NASA. He's an engineer of NASA, and well, he started telling us what his oh, he was born in Camagüey, by the way.
He said that because I know.
Well, Havana is very important to me. So, well, and this gentleman started showing us in his own cell the rover that is currently examining the planet Mars. He's in charge of analyzing the composition of the Mars soil. Imagine how important that is. But he was showing us the rover working in Mars at lunch. Imagine how far we have gone even to space.
Well, here you have two additional examples. And now, Carmen Valdivia, if you could refer to what is being done for history preservation and what is being done to help the immigrant children who are coming along without their parents.
I am a member of Operation Pedro Pan Grouping. Está apagado, déjame ver. Ya está apagado. ¿Alguien lo sabe encender? Okay. I am a member of Operation Pedro Pan Grouping. It's a national organization of former Pedro Pan children. And we have 3 missions. One is to find Pedro Pans and reunite them. The other one is to help children, unaccompanied children, whether regardless of race or religion or anything else. Our aim is just to help them. And we do many things for them. We buy them presents and we buy them things to entertain them. If they need a plasma TV, if they need a new mattress, because the government provides for them, but all these other things like going to the aquarium or going bowling or having a party with cake and Coca-Cola, which is not something that the government provides. So we do all those things for them. Before, we used to be able to meet with them and have picnics, but that is not allowed anymore. But we still, even though we cannot meet with them, we do provide for them. And then what we're doing as far as our history, of course, we're getting older, and we have to make sure that we give our legacy to our children so that everybody knows what happened, and especially that it's very important to find out how history happened so that it doesn't repeat itself again. And so it's very important to know how you lose your liberty and how difficult it is to gain it, and I mean Cuba hasn't gained it. And how lucky we are to be here. And so what we do is we have a documentary, we do lectures, we do exhibits. We started with a small exhibit in FIU, and we didn't have articles to exhibit, so Carmencita Romanash was there, and I put our things, and then people started liking it and giving. So now our collection is huge. I don't think there's a collection of Pedro Pan articles like the ones that we have. And so then we went to FIU and then History Miami. It was in the 75 years of History Miami. It's the most successful exhibit that they've had. Then I became director of the American Museum of the Cuban Diaspora, and in there we thought a year would be enough. But everybody's complaining, everybody's going to the museum trying to find after we closed it. So now we're gonna do another exhibit at Barry University, which opens on October 8th. And then after that, we have many things that we're planning. So I left the museum so that I can dedicate my time, full time to our history, because we have very little time to finish what we started. So that's where we're at.
Thank you very much. Before, I don't want to prolong this much because you have the tour of the museum and the refreshments, but any question or comment from any of the audience, especially the young people?
Could I introduce, I forgot.
Yes, please.
Could I introduce the members? Wait.
Please.
We have many members of our board of Operation Pedro Pan Grouping. We have Javier Llorens, who's our president, and then we have Jorge, our vice president, and Carmencita Romanash is our treasurer, and Melvin is one of the directors. And so we also have another very Pedro Pan here, Nancy. So I wanted to introduce our board.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for coming to this presentation.
Grateful to the Peter Pan Project. I've known several doctors, neurologists and psychiatrists and so forth that were Peter Pan kids, and they've been so good in helping our country. And I really am very grateful to you people.
Maybe the president of the organization wants to talk about the development of the the initial development of the program, we were the participants.
Okay, well, let's take that last part that you mentioned, that children's exodus have occurred throughout history, okay? The last big one that we had was called Kinder Transport. It was about 10,000 mainly Jewish kids, that were taken out of Nazi Germany right before World War II. And so then we were the children's exodus out of Cuba, Operation Pedro Pan, and it was over 14,000 kids that were running away from communism and taking refuge here in the United States. Okay, now I'm getting to that part. How it started was that, of course, Castro took over. There was a lot of a very bloody repression with firing squad executions by the thousands and thousands of political prisoners. And then after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, then everything just, you knew that there was no hope of saving Cuba. So Cuba was like a sinking ship. Okay? So at that time already they had closed all the private schools in the island, and they after the private schools were closed, the kids didn't have anywhere to go to school because you were getting indoctrinated in the public schools. So the parents started putting them out of harm's way by bringing them here to the United States. And since one of the schools was closed, that was called the Ruston Academy, the headmaster of that academy was called Mr. James Baker. He was a Harvard-educated headmaster, and then he came to Miami with a list of about 125 kids that parents were in his school, and the school was shut down. So they needed to bring the kids, and he wanted to establish a boarding school here in Miami. So when he came over, he had about 125 kids already in his list. And that's called Baker's list. And then the members from the American Chamber of Commerce in Havana were already here because the embassy American embassy in Havana had shut down already in January 3rd of '61. So they told him there's already a priest here that has established a charity organization called Catholic Welfare Bureau to take care of the Cuban kids coming in. And it was so Monsignor Brian O. Walsh was the executive director of the Catholic Welfare Bureau. So he met with James Baker, and then they agreed that James Baker was going to help bring those kids and more out of Cuba. And then once they were here by themselves on a company, then they would have Father Walsh was going to take care of them through his the Catholic Welfare Bureau. Okay, that's how it started. Baker went back to Cuba. In 2 weeks' time, he already had 510 kids in that list that I told you about. So it grew exponentially. Right after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, there was an effort of exiled Cubans to liberate the island. So that was not successful. So after that, then you had to get out of Cuba. And that's how it just grew to over 14,000, right before the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962.
Thank you. One last question. Dr. Vázquez Hernández.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Montoya, who I'm grateful for. I was a professor of history at Miami-Dade College. He hired me. And I'm now retired. So thank you for that. Just real quick, Dr. Montoya, you and I have worked on this subject before. My parents in New York, we received 2 Cuban families on the Vuelo de la Libertad. They were my brother-in-law's parents. And Cuba y Puerto Rico son de un pájaro las dos alas. We've always been in solidarity with the Cuban people, and we received many Cubans. And then when I was a young man, I went to Puerto Rico University, and I met hundreds of Cubans. So So I'm just curious of all those 14,000, because Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, and all Puerto Ricans and everyone who lives on the island is a U.S. citizen. Were there any Pedro Pan that wound up in Puerto Rico?
I don't have the details, but the answer is yes.
Can you have one person?
I have to say this because Puerto Rico is very good to us. They receive us with, you know, of course, if we speak Spanish, so it was easy for us. And Puerto Rico was a great place to be. And in 2000, I think it was 2011, we went to Puerto Rico. And I had this idea, there had to be more people in Puerto Rico that were like me, that were Pedro Pan, and they didn't know. Because in Puerto Rico, we didn't hear anything about Operation Pedro Pan and the group and everything. So we went there, and we organized a lunch, somebody Pedro Pan, 2 persons we knew organized, and we found 50 or 60 people who came to that lunch in Puerto Rico, and it was great because all those people knew each other, but they didn't know that the others were Pedro Pan. So it was great. So yes, there's a big colony in Puerto Rico, and thank you.
Okay, yes, sir.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. I do want to add one thing that was an omission, and a glaring omission. First of all, from a small pool of 14,000, it's just amazing how many successes came from that small group. But you mentioned hundreds of priests and nuns.
Yes.
But what really motivated these parents to send their children to America is that the one-party rule prohibited by law religious instruction.
Yes.
In your home, not in church, in your own home. And I just wanted to add that.
And motivating the children at school to basically denounce the parents if they observe something happening at home. That was...
But this is how far it
Yes.
went, and I agree with you that we have a disturbing trend here in this hemisphere.
Yes.
There's something that I wanted to add. When we talk about the rumor of the Patria Potestad was not really a rumor. My father said, I lost my Patria Potestad because once, when I was born, I decided I was going to be Catholic because my family was Catholic and I was going to go to Catholic school. Once those Catholic schools were nationalized and the priests and the nuns were kicked out of the country, and there was no choice but to send us to after the, in 1961 they had la Ley de la Nacionalización de la Enseñanza, which is nationalization of the education, and then schools had to teach Marxism. Once you cannot choose how you're going to raise your children and what kind of education they're going to receive, you have no power over them and you are not a parent any longer, and that's why our families decided if we are not going to have our rights as parents in Cuba, then we'll send them to the United States where we still have a power over how they're going to be raised. And that's why I'm still Catholic and so are my children, because my parents had the guts to send me to freedom, and they are our heroes, and we always are so grateful to them for giving us our freedom, not only to us, but to our children and our grandchildren, because still Cuba is not free. Okay?
All right.
All right, thank you, Dr. Montoya, that was wonderful. Thank you for all the European folks that are here, supporting Dr. Montoya and supporting the cause. I can't imagine as a father or a grandfather or a great-grandfather that I am, just give your child away. I just can't imagine what your parents went through. And I understand why they did it, but I just can't understand it. I'm glad you're all here and you contribute to our society. And it sounds like it's a lot of success among you folks. So thank you for coming. Please join us at the museum, Pastelitos. So if we can walk across, the police is out there helping us out to get us across, so please come out. Los estudiantes míos, por favor, vayan al museo que hay por unos 5 minutos con el pastelito, nos vamos a tirar la foto y se pueden ir a dar un tour al museo. Gracias.